Thank you for joining us today on the inaugural episode of Regulatory Ramblings. I'm Majcher Shamdasani, and hopefully this won't be the last episode. You're in for quite a treat today in that our guest is Bill Majcher, and he was a Royal Canadian Mounted Police Inspector for 22 years. He currently lives in Hong Kong with his wife and two daughters. Bill was an undercover operative for the bulk of that time with the Mounties, and during the course of his life, he learned a great deal about money laundering, organized crime, and where regulation and policy fall short. Something you and I have talked about often over the years is that money laundering is much in vogue after 9/11, Patriot Act, notions of terrorist financing, all of that. But that there are a lot of anti-money laundering specialists in this world, not too many money laundering specialists, not too many people that have seen the other side of the equation that have actually done it. And I'm just wondering then, for law enforcement and regulators and policymakers, those that are trying to stop it, what is the consequence of their not having that knowledge of how it's done? Not knowing the other side of the equation, what does that mean then for compliance? What are the problems, gaps that creates in compliance?
Well, there's a few. I mean, there's I think there's some. I call them my truisms, right? And one of my truisms is that we don't catch the smart criminals. We only catch the dumb guys. And so, you think about it. When there's regulatory change or there needs to be a change in the laws, it's invariably based on the fact that they're aware that there are people getting around the laws, circumventing the laws. But think about this, Ajay. We're only catching the dumb guys. And by the time it goes through the legal process, court process, maybe 3 or 4 years later, before new legislation or regulatory change is implemented to deal with what a court has found to be an offense. So for the last 4 years, what have the smart guys been doing? And it really comes down, I look on a macro level, that you consider since, let's just say since year 2000, right? Just so 20 years. We even go later than that. Let's call it since 2005. Because we had the financial crisis and all
Delta
that.
Asia, they were threatened with 312 action in Macau, yeah.
Yeah, Dela Norte and all that, and I've met them actually. And
people say that wasn't actually proven, and that what was true of Delta Asia was true of all the banks in Macau not having adequate compliance. But they singled out that bank, and the mere threat of being cut off from the U.S. financial system was enough to get everyone else to toe the line. But I'm digressing.
Yeah. It could have been made as an example, but don't forget, the gentleman that owned the bank,
Stanley Au.
He was on the People's Consultative Council, so it might, an oblique message
to Beijing.
Yeah. But by the U.S. regulator, hey, we've got to set an example. We're going to set an example that is somewhat painful to the establishment.
No, it makes sense. Because people have long said, what is the purpose of Hong Kong and Macau? That they're there to enable you to do what you can't do in China proper, in the mainland. Yeah. Tax evasion, gambling, and money laundering. Yeah, and China even then had a huge issue with outflows of foreign exchange above the daily threshold limits. But I'm sorry.
No. First of all, I think you're right. It's not a mystery that Hong Kong is a great money laundering center of Asia, although I'm sure some of it's shifting to Singapore just by dint of money moving.
Things are changing, yeah.
I look at very obvious little things. So Hong Kong, New York Stock Exchange company, the resale value of a New York Stock Exchange company is probably going to be, give or take, around $1 million, right? Just for the pure intrinsic value of a listing. Yeah. If you recall about...
And the cost of going public.
Yeah, that in addition. But but intrinsic value is about $1 million. What was Hong Kong? I think even today with a market depressed and China a bit depressed, but I certainly know 5, 6, 7 years ago, the listing status, the consideration on the listing status for Hong Kong was as high as 800-900 million Hong Kong dollars. But over 100 million US just for that. What made Hong Kong so special that somebody's willing to pay 100x over a New York Stock Exchange company just for the intrinsic value of the listing? I mean, it's all about a vehicle. It's all about a means and a mechanism. You look at what happened with the big Russian laundromat investigation. Somewhere about $600-700 million was viewed to have flowed through Hong Kong, and one of the things that's unique about Hong Kong, apart from the value of its licensed entities and regulated entities, is Hong Kong, the HKMA regulates the banks, right? They are the regulator for the banks.
In all their activities, even their security sales, even their insurance.
All their sales. But the HKMA also has a commercial relationship with the Hong Kong Banking Association in the form of the Hong Kong Interbank Clearing Corporation, right? And so, and the Hong Kong Clearing Corporation has what they call the CMU, the Central Money Market Unit. So every form of value, FX, currency, security that passes in and out of Hong Kong by the entities that are regulated by the head of the HKMA, and the secretary responsible for HKMA is the finance secretary, also responsible for the economic and financial health of Hong Kong. So it's a heck of a divergence when the person who's most responsible for the economic health is also responsible for enforcing compliance with the very banks that are capturing all those capital flows. So if he makes it too rigid, you think about Hong Kong, not until 2012, I believe, before they really even had a money laundering statute that dealt with border currency controls, dealt with and addressed a number of the FATF guidelines. I mean, Hong Kong, a sophisticated financial city.
AMLO, came out in 2012.
Yeah, was bereft of all that. I don't think that's by accident.
Well, that was meant to fix an earlier ordinance in 2007, and even then they were like, well, the different pieces of AML legislation in the territory are scattered here and there, and the organized crime ordinance, and we want to consolidate them. But yeah, that was a do-over for something they should have done. They were supposed to have done in 2007.
But on this point, but again, I think it's too easy to say it's for these reasons. One of the things I've learned, I've laundered money for people. People have laundered money for me, and one of the things that I realized is if I was to be a professional money launderer, if I was to come back in life as a professional money launderer, the very first thing I would do is get a law degree. And I'd get a law degree because now I'm in the club. My conspiracy or my actions can be covered by solicitor-client privilege. But more importantly, I can go to other lawyers like myself and say, hey, listen, I need an independent legal opinion that says this structure that I'm setting up for my client over here is acceptable. And that's my get out of jail free card because, gee, I went out and I paid for an independent legal opinion. It's about as independent as your mother, because it's your guys you do coke with, it's the guys you drink with, it's the guys you go golfing with who are giving you that independent legal opinion. And why do you think? Jurisdiction equals freedom. That's the other thing that goes with this. And if I'm going to put together a cohesive and a sophisticated structure, I want to be in multiple jurisdictions, and I want to get the legal opinions. I don't want it all from one law firm. I want to be able to break that chain so everybody's got that sense of not being accountable completely in case it goes awry. Common sense tells me, this looks a little dodgy, but hey, what we're doing isn't dodgy. I mean, this thing is an orchestration. It's no wonder that Mark Carney, former governor of the Bank of England said, banking has a crisis of legitimacy. And again, this goes to something even more fundamental. When after 9/11, I was working undercover in Miami for several years for the FBI, and then the September 11th terrorist attacks happened. So I got called back to Canada and to Ottawa. I said, Bill, can you do an audit of our covert infrastructure? We need to up our game. We need to, what can we do to be more adept, more robust? Because the landscape has changed, and we're going after global terrorists. We're going after the facilitators of who's sponsoring and allowing terrorist financing, which includes organized crime. Most terrorists raise money by being drug dealers or by doing frauds. I mean, there's nothing particularly unique about them being criminals who just happen to have a cause that they believe is worth raising money for. And so we did that. And in the process of doing that, we set up covert banking operations globally. When I say globally, one civil law country in Europe. We had our storefront in Canada, and then we worked with partner agencies, mostly within NATO type countries, so we could facilitate their drug, their customs, their different units, where we could move money either to support an operation, where we could move money on behalf of bad guys to help develop criminal evidence. And we had lots of ways to firewall everything.
And select banks were no doubt used for payoffs.
Oh, huge. And so what I used to do is teach our undercover people, say, listen, we've got to go out there, and we're setting up these corporations, we're setting up regulated businesses. You need to be able to go and convince the banks that you are a legitimate correspondent banking customer, right? And it was very easy to do that. I've laundered money through lots of banks. And again, this is one of the fundamental flaws with money laundering. And let me backtrack just a little bit. You had said it earlier, we have lots of AML compliance experts. And I say,
a lot of people peddling their services around town.
And the truth is, when I used to have guys launder money for me, I used to say to them, listen, my money comes from cocaine trafficking. Generally, that was how I did it. It comes from cocaine trafficking. I've already taken the risk, or my organization's already taken the risk in generating that money. You're going to clean my money. I want you to do everything perfectly legit. I don't need you to put me involved into anything that is criminal in nature. I don't want you to put my money into a fraud, a drug deal, or something else. And I certainly don't want somebody else's money coming in and mingling with mine. Actually, I didn't care because we're monitoring it. But if I was a legitimate, again, role-playing, right? I'm a cautious guy. The truth is, 95, maybe 98% of the ways that sophisticated bad guys launder money is completely legal. There's nothing illegal about buying and selling a house. There's nothing illegal about buying and selling securities. All of those are perfectly legitimate transactions, as long as I paper it up all the right way, as long as professional fees are paid for everybody. Nobody's going to really dig down to really question what's the underlying source of funds, especially when there's a few layers in between. So it's really the source of the money, or the purpose for which you're going to use otherwise legitimate money, for a criminal act that you need to be concerned about. So that gets lost in the wash. People think that, oh yeah, money laundering should be obvious because it must be a drug deal. No, it's everything else. And again, we don't catch the smart guys, Ajay. The only time we catch the smart guys is because of informants, or because somebody else got arrested and they say, hey, you think I'm bad? Wait till I tell you about this guy. Those kind of things, or a peeved off spouse. So the smart guys make it difficult. And you got to understand something again about that banks and financial institutions fundamentally must understand. As a sophisticated money launderer or financial or terrorist criminal at a big order, I'm not trying to do anything that's going to raise any problems for the bank. I want the bank to operate exactly what I want it for, to move my money. I'm not going to try to defraud the bank. I'm not going to try to chintz out on a few percent on fees. You know, I'll pay all the banking fees. I'll be your best private wealth management customer you could have. Why do you think everybody's chasing China money? Why has trillions of dollars poured out of China?
Even it's of questionable sources. Yeah, I mean, no, that's a valid point. But coming back to what you were saying, that you only catch dumb criminals. Around about 2013, 2014, we had two multi-billion-dollar money laundering cases. In both instances, the touts, those that were ultimately convicted and imprisoned, lived on public housing estates. In one case, you had an elderly woman who was receiving phone calls and instructions from a woman she vaguely kind of remembered all those years ago from somewhere in Shenzhen or southern China, where they were from the same village, and she was instructing her to make these deposits at X, Y, and Z bank. Another case, you had a young man, in his late teens, early 20s, same. He was making deposits around town. In both cases, the judges more or less said, you're clearly not the masterminds behind these schemes, but you should have known better. Now, to the bank's credit, they filled out their suspicious activity reports, suspicious transaction reports, sent them on to the JFIU, which our Joint Financial Intelligence Unit in Hong Kong is comprised of the Customs and Excise Department and the Hong Kong Police. They filled out, the JFIU didn't connect the dots in time. My point to you is this, that if it takes that much time to catch up to multi-billion-dollar cases, then at the lower level, the guy who's making 60 a month and sliding in an extra 40 or 50 into his bank account, at that low level, that type of money laundering is going to slip through the nets.
Well, you think back to what I was about to mention earlier. Since 2005 till today, there's been well over $1 trillion worth of fines, penalties, and disgorgements against the global banks, maybe even more. And then, of course, the increased compliance cost and all that, it's well over $1 trillion, might even be $1.5 trillion. Do you believe we have more money laundering today than we had in 2005?
Absolutely not. I would submit this to you, that multiple jurisdictions will get their assessments every 4 years from the FATF, and they'll give you a score that you are compliant to this level. Even the US was found wanting when they had theirs in 2016 or 2017. My sense is, from having covered this space for a number of years, it doesn't matter what the overall level of compliance is, at least on paper. All that reflects is how good you are at doing compliance work and the protocols, the procedures, filing the right paperwork and ticking the right boxes. That has nothing to do with the level of illicit or questionable funds sloshing around your economy. You see the dichotomy.
Yeah, no, I see it. But what I'm saying is it's an abject failure. The FATF guidelines might have been well-intentioned, but
the 40 recommendations.
But if we really take a look, have they been effective? I would say, of course, they haven't been effective.
What is it? Because people have said they're not fit for the 21st century. What are the 40 recommendations missing?
Well, I think it's more a case of, what is the outcome you want? Let's work it backwards. Yeah. You should go in there. Like, what's the outcome you want? Well, we want to eradicate, criminal proceeds. We want to eradicate corruption. We don't want to reward illicit behaviors and all the things that go with social order. Okay, well, are we doing it well? Well, no, doesn't appear to be, but let's have another conference and talk about it. I think fundamentally, as I look at it, we've adopted very pedantically a rules-based and a risk-based approach, right, to money laundering. On the surface, sounds great, but so far, what you're sitting on is a two-legged stool, right? If you have a three-legged stool, which leg do you want to remove? You don't want to remove any of them. But right now, compliance in our system is knowingly a two-legged stool. Rules-based, risk-based. I could launder money easily through especially a rules-based system, because that's my roadmap. You're telling me the map. And I can tick these boxes. I can fabricate whatever I know you want to see, and I can lie to your face, and I can produce documentation that absolutely allows you to tick the boxes. I'm going to be good. But what the banks are scared to death of, financial institutions are scared to death of a verifiable, bona fide, principle-based governance model. And I don't mean governance like, the spirit of the law and all the rest of it. What steps are boards of directors taking to ensure that conduct and culture is actually being adhered to? Because right now you sit at the board level, your management is telling you what they want you to hear because they're only focused on their budget or their bonus for the year. And so you as a director are hiding behind the fact that, well, we've instituted this and this and this. Yeah, okay, but is it effective? Are there steps that you have taken to determine, independent of management bias, that your staff are doing what they're supposed to be doing? And how can you demonstrate that? There's ways to do that. And that is what's really lacking. I mean, obviously the other one is, why aren't people going to jail? Why aren't more people being told you're not fit and proper to be a lawyer, an accountant, an auditor? You're not fit and proper to be a banker. I mean, you could drive a truck through some of the willful blindness that you see out there, right?
That's the second or third time you brought up the legal profession.
Yep.
Some of the worst culprits in this equation are respectable members of society that belong to the traditional or even non-traditional lawyers, accountants, consultants, tax planners, professional services providers in general, that they get their cut, they get their fee, they facilitate the problem, but in terms of sanctions, in terms of punishments, not too much comes their way. So I'd like to get your thoughts on that. And something else in response to what you were saying, why haven't there been too many arrests, too many convictions? It seems to me that when you have organizations as hierarchical as financial institutions, multiple levels, you know this from criminal law, with each level, you have to prove intent. And in terms of the chain of causality, if the execs are that far removed, then it makes sense that only the underlings get nailed. If that. Because it also comes down to, well, what does the paper trail say? What's the document? What does the evidentiary trail say?
Well, I think part of the problem, some of these institutions have gotten so big, they're unwieldy. They don't even know what they have. But the onus is on them. The reality is, again, it sounds like I'm picking on lawyers, but many cases, everything I talk about is based on my own personal experiences. It's not what somebody else has told me. So again, going from my own experiences. If you remember a few years ago, the Mossack Fonseca people were saying, "Oh, we're being vilified. We're going to sue Netflix because they did a movie that wasn't very nice about us. We're good guys." Well, I'll tell you what. I'll tell you right now. Of course, they're money launderers. 100% they're money launderers. Now, why can I say that? I can say it publicly. I can scream in the public forum, and I've done it. Why? Because there's a 2.5-hour videotape of me sitting on an FBI covert yacht meeting senior representative of Mossack Fonseca, who was telling me how he's going to help launder my cocaine money of $3 million a day that's being generated for the fictitious cartel I was working for. And selling me on the efficacy of using a foundation rather than trusts at that point in time to give more flexibility. He's describing to me how FinCEN works, the U.S. Financial Intelligence Unit, how to defeat and get around their controls. And again, gave me a whole lecture about what and how they can do it, and going with insurance-linked products, because even if everybody gets arrested, we've got it structured the right way, when you come out, probably be able to be protected on those insurance-linked products set up through the foundation. And I said, okay, that's all great. And they were so good that this guy offered, all on tape, of course, he had 5 different law firms willing to take my cocaine money in cash into their law firms, and my laundering fee was 7%. And then they get it down to Mossack Fonseca through them. I have another one where the lawyer had the largest fine ever by the SEC against a Canadian for civil fraud, and yet he was still a member in good standing with the Law Society of Upper Canada. He, we had him linked to Bonanno crime family. He had worked in Sicilian bank doing their stuff. Through him, he offered to sell me PayPal so I could use it, with my criminal proceeds, and not just to launder the money, but also have all the identifiers of clients for other criminal purposes. And used to say to me, look, Bill, if you need to phone any of your people, just use my law office, because police, certainly this lawyer was out of Toronto. Police have a very difficult time in Canada to wiretap a law firm or a law office. In fact, it is impossible. It may say on the books you can do it, but it doesn't happen. And so he said, just use my phones to have any of the conversations you need to have. At one point he said to me, because I was operating out of Miami then, and he said, Bill, really, you should think of moving your criminal enterprise to Canada, because it's 20 times safer than if you get caught in the States. Then I had another lawyer who actually was the lawyer for the Hells Angels, set up all their international bank accounts for at least the West Coast chapter, was dealing with the mob, linked to a number of murders. And he's telling me, he says, listen, I come down here to Miami to see you, but you really should move to Canada. It's 100 times safer. They all know how to do the legal arbitrage. They all know how to play the game. So in its entirety, I mean, lawyers are bestowed with so much presumed power and influence. And the problem you then have in criminal trials, at least in English law jurisdictions, and most of them, I mean, I go by the adage, you're innocent until proven broke. But our judiciary takes the view that the evidence in a criminal trial, especially a financial one, is really just a sideshow. The conduct of the police is the main event, right? So it's all process over truth.
Okay. Is there anything that can be done to improve the AML landscape? I mean, in the past we've spoken about the random virtues testing that you're trying to get more people to adopt.
Yeah, I mean, I think putting that third leg on the compliance stool that focuses on principle-based conduct and culture, and being able to quantify that. And there are ways to do it. I won't get into the details here, without creating liability for the banks, without creating a self-reporting event for the banks. I think the system would do well to not punish banks for self-reporting. I mean, why do I want to self-report if I'm going to have nothing but a headache if I can sort of bury it? I mean, that's human nature to put the dust underneath the rug, because if I show it, I'm going to be mired in it. So I think regulators could be a little less pedantic about some of those things. But I think fundamentally, the world is changing rapidly now. And at any point in time, we're going through the great technology age, right? Yeah. DeFi, fintech, all these things.
Yeah, a blessing or a curse?
Well, the reality is, at any given point in human history, there's always been the greatest piece of technology. Might have been a rock. First time I did an armed robbery, it was a rock over the head. Then the guy refined to an arrow, then they refined to a gun. Still the same elements of the crime. The problem is, the only thing that's been constant throughout human history is human behavior, right? It hasn't been technology. And because we're living in this, this is so wonderful. The elements of the crime haven't changed. And the problem is, you think of the banking contracts, right? Fintech's all about selling the customer journey, the user interface with banking, the interface with contracts. Well, the truth is, a banking contract hasn't substantially changed from what came out 300 years ago. Here's something fundamental, too, about money laundering. Again, anything that you and I agree represents a stored measure of value, we can launder with that.
Which brings us to the next point. Look, when you and I first met, I think it was June of 2014, you were giving a talk at the Canadian Chamber of Commerce entitled Confessions of a Money Launderer, How I Used and Abused the World's Capital Markets for 20 Years. With that in mind, and given all that's happened in the intervening 8 years, what are your thoughts on preserving what's left of the integrity of the capital markets and regulated engines of commerce?
Well, the reality is, what's the alternative?
Or is there any hope or not?
I think, early in my police career, I used to get angry and offended by the injustice that I used to see, the inability to hold, bad guys accountable and how they get off. And then I just got to a point where I realized all governments, all societies operate with a certain license for larceny, because, you've got to skid the wheels. And I don't think it's any different on a country level than it is at a local level. And the problem with knocking everything down, what do you replace it with? And I know why. I would say I come out of government, but I believe the less government in our lives, the better. I fundamentally believe that. I see the abuses by those who hide behind, their classifications in government to cover up their ineptness or their chicanery. And yeah, it's not a perfect system. All we can do is try to reduce the opportunities and hold people accountable who should be held accountable. And it's a sad truth, but one that I've just said, okay, it is what it is. But the law is not equal, not even close to being equal. So once you give up that false belief, then things, they find their own slots. And
to what extent are cybercrime and money laundering connected?
Well,
to what where do they intersect?
Well, they intersect that the digital universe, as I said, the cyber universe is infinite. For me to do a fraud 100 years ago, or say 200 years ago, and try to get as many people as possible, it means I had to have a really fast horse. I had to get in front of people to pitch them and tell them my story, right? And hopefully they fall for it. Well, let's fast track days of the automobile, TV, spam. Everything's a progression of getting in front of more eyes, ears, and everything else. And now, and there was a time, if I'm a con man, I got to get in front of somebody, and it takes a bit of verve to be a con man. You just, hey, I'm going to be a con man today, guys. That absence of morality, that ability to keep calm, and
sociopathic coldness.
Yeah, but now, again, I said earlier at the beginning, what best defines the difference between an honest and a dishonest person? That's opportunity. So you've got all these guys out there with computers, sitting in basements, sitting in offices, feeling that life hasn't been fair. And more so, they come from third world countries where, rightly or wrongly, they haven't been given the same opportunities as the rich part of the world. But I have access to you now because the internet allows me to be whoever I want to be. I can create an illusion too. We think the police have got it figured out. Bad guys have got it figured out before we do. And so now the digital universe has put every citizen into play. I can sit there and now you've got the bots pinging in on people.
Everyone's a target.
Everybody's a target. And now when you go to do the enforcement, okay, where's that person living? Well, we're not sure. It went through a server here and it went there, and okay, who's got jurisdiction? Well, this police force, but they don't have the means. We have a tsunami of criminality that's going to sweep over us very shortly, even more so than now.
Okay. Lastly, what are your thoughts on the current Russia sanctions regime and its implications for China, if any?
That's a good question. I do deal with some of those issues. I mean, the sanctions are being rolled out. I think anything that puts pressure on the Russian regime to change behavior is a good thing. I happen to know one of the oligarchs personally who I just discovered a few days ago was placed under sanction. And I do find it a bit of a stretch to be able to say, we're going to sanction you for something that we think you did 15 years ago, but we haven't put you through a court of law yet to adjudicate whether you did something illegal or criminal. It's just an assumption, but you're one of Putin's buddies, so you're sanctioned. Those are slippery slopes, right? What other property are we going to start losing because, government says we now have a template, and I'm not against sanctions, but I'm not sure they're applied uniformly. I think it's a form of lawfare, and again, I have no problem going after the bad guys, but the other side's always the good guy, and the other, or somebody's got to be the good and the bad guy here. I just find that I'm more concerned about government overreach into my life and every part of my life, and I think everybody should be concerned in the name of security, because security is a motherhood issue. A lot of new laws, a lot of new powers come out of fear. Fear sells very well.
What are you going to do? It's the emotions of the moment, but we'll have to leave it there. Bill Majcher, thank you so much. It's been fun, and hope to have you back again.
Look forward to it, Jay. Thanks for having me.